To understand the Gospel of Luke, we first have to address the synoptic problem, why Matthew, Mark, and Luke share so much identical wording and sequence, yet diverge in highly specific, often conflicting ways. Luke was a meticulous, active historian dealing with a complex web of existing documents. Early scholarly attempts to solve this puzzle, like the Augustinian hypothesis, proposed a simple linear order. Matthew wrote first, Mark summarized Matthew, and Luke followed. But that model fails to explain why Mark, acting as a mere summarizer, regularly includes more vivid detail in his stories while entirely omitting massive teaching blocks like the Sermon on the Mount. This diagram shows the dominant academic consensus, the four-source theory, formalized in the 1920s. It places Mark as the earliest gospel, serving as the primary narrative spine that flows directly into both Matthew and Luke. But Matthew and Luke share a large amount of teaching material absent from Mark. To account for this, the model introduces a second source, Q. Q comes from the German word Quell, meaning source. It refers to a fluid pool of circulating oral and written sayings, utilized independently by both Matthew and Luke. Luke was operating in a dense literary environment, rich with circulating traditions. Constructing his narrative required him to act as a highly selective editor, choosing exactly which pieces of history served his specific argument. This compositional breakdown maps out the final two components of the four-source model, M, which is material unique to Matthew, and L, which is material entirely unique to Luke. When we isolate the L material, we find a massive textual anomaly. 42% of Luke's entire gospel is comprised exclusively of this unique L source. That is nearly 500 verses across 47 distinct texts found nowhere else in the historical record. Inside this unique fraction of the text, we find 4 distinct miracles, including the healing of the 10 lepers, and an entirely fresh set of parables. The Good Samaritan, the Prodigal Son, and the Rich Man and Lazarus all originate solely from the L material. This volume of unique, highly curated material reveals a historian actively shaping a theological defense. To accurately date this text, we first have to determine exactly who required such a specific and highly targeted argument. Luke explicitly names his recipient in the opening prologue, a man named Theophilus. There are numerous theories regarding his identity, but we can rule out the extremes. Theophilus is likely not a complete pagan requiring basic evangelism, nor is he a Roman official demanding a legal defense of Christianity. The text spends too much time on internal community ethics and complex theological exhortation for those profiles to fit. The internal evidence heavily points to a specific sociological profile, a God-fearer. A God-fearer was a Gentile attracted to the monotheism and strict ethics of the Jewish synagogue, but who stopped short of circumcision and formal entry into the Israelite community. Theophilus appears to be a man of rank who has associated himself with the Christian movement, but is now experiencing a period of severe doubts. He is a Gentile trying to find his footing in a racially mixed, highly scrutinized, and heavily persecuted Jewish sect. Luke and Acts operate together as a targeted pastoral intervention. The 2 volumes are meticulously designed to reassure a marginalized Gentile that he belongs in this new, confusing community. The early Christian church was a hostile environment. It was a racially mixed community facing intense internal friction over the law, while simultaneously dealing with widespread rejection by mainstream Judaism. Luke deploys his unique L material to directly address this tension. The parables he selects, the lost coin, the lost sheep, the great banquet, relentlessly emphasize radical inclusion, the preciousness of outsiders, and the expansion of God's blessing beyond traditional borders. He reinforces this through the parallel structure of his 2 volumes. In the Gospel, Jesus is violently rejected by his own people. In Acts chapter 7, the martyr Stephen faces the exact same rejection. Luke links the life of the founder to the life of the followers. Acts then meticulously documents God's explicit commands to cross ethnic lines. Luke highlights the conversion of Cornelius's Gentile household in chapter 10 and records the formal rulings of the Jerusalem Council in chapter 15, which protected uncircumcised believers. The Christian movement did not simply choose to isolate itself from mainstream Judaism, it was forcibly pushed out. Luke's sociological apologetic proves to Theophilus that Gentile inclusion was the intended covenantal design from the beginning. Mapping Theophilus's social reality anchors the text to a specific moment in the first century. It provides the necessary context for the ultimate historical question: when was this sophisticated two-volume defense actually written? The dominant critical consensus places the writing of Luke Acts sometime between 80 and 90 AD. This is well after the Roman Empire laid siege to Jerusalem and destroyed the temple in 70 AD. The linchpin argument for this late date relies on Jesus' eschatological discourses in Luke 19 and 21. In these passages, Jesus vividly describes Jerusalem surrounded by armies, its walls leveled, and its citizens falling by the sword. Scholars look at these detailed descriptions of a siege and assume retrojection, the belief that a writer must have witnessed the event to describe it. Under this theory, Luke is writing after the destruction of 70 AD, inserting the historical details back into the mouth of Jesus. The stakes here are high. If the consensus is correct, Luke is writing retroactive history to justify a past tragedy. But if the text points earlier, it alters our view of Luke's prophetic accuracy and the timeline of the early church. The post-70 AD assumption relies on a specific flaw. The siege language in Luke does not contain any details that are uniquely exclusive to the 70 AD Roman attack. This textual comparison shows the reality. Luke's vocabulary mirrors standard ancient military tactics. More importantly, it directly parallels older Old Testament texts describing the sacking of Solomon's temple. He uses established covenantal language like surround you and dash to the ground. Jesus could predict this destruction based on his understanding of how God judges covenant unfaithfulness. Luke did not need to witness a war to record these words. Treating the fall of Jerusalem as a completed historical event in these texts is an unnecessary inference. The primary pillar holding up the 80s AD dating hypothesis collapses. This leaves us with the affirmative internal evidence, which firmly roots the two-volume work in an earlier window, the early to mid-60s AD. The strongest proof for this is the very sociological tension regarding Theophilus. Acts details intense, unresolved debates over Jew-Gentile table fellowship, circumcision, and dietary laws. These specific tensions match the era of Paul's letters, written in the 50s and 60s. By the 80s, the Christian movement was predominantly Gentile, and the urgency of those Jewish-Gentile debates had largely passed. Then there is the profound argument from silence. Scholars who argue for a late date claim Luke regularly updated his materials to reflect current events. If that is true, why is there absolutely zero direct mention of the actual destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD? Furthermore, Acts ends abruptly, without recording the execution of James in 62 AD, or the martyrdom of the Apostle Paul in the late 60s. Luke is widely regarded as a first-class ancient historian, operating with the same rigor as someone like Thucydides. A historian of that caliber would not omit the deaths of his central characters, or ignore the total destruction of his narrative's central city, if those events had already occurred. Acts ends open-endedly because history was still unfolding as the ink dried. Driven by meticulous curation and the need to resolve a pastoral crisis, the internal evidence undeniably places Luke's masterpiece in the volatile early 60s AD.